Hello, everyone, and welcome to YouTube Masterclass. This is Dr. Aaron Sheley, and I'm here as an adjunct professor from California Institute of the Arts, the University of Southern California, and from Harvard University. And I had recently, a few years ago, received my PhD in cinema and my PhD in writing, and you can see how these are things that I teach throughout my professor career, as well as things I continue studying now in different forms through different experiments. And I want to give you that credential because to be a professor of a class that rewards units, you have to have to really have your PhDs in a row, you have your masters in a row, and sometimes you get more than one along the path because it helps you to justify the other one. And that has something to do with how they have a chain of PhDs when they come time to serve for them all, but then the time multiplies that it's going to take to do all that. But to get those credentials, then you can teach courses where the students can gain units. And that's the whole idea of the college thing that goes the college scheduling and the college taking of classes that concerns taking film classes would again be the elective, which is like the film elective, which is like if you took a minor in film, then you could take, that for a film class for units towards the minor. And we'll discuss as that comes up at Harvard because you would have to have, like for a minor, you'd have to have, 36, 39 units, about maybe more, like a lot more. You'd have to have about 50 units for a minor or something, you would say. And you get those from taking these classes that give you 4 units. So your minor would be like more like, you're right, it would be more like 16 units, yeah. But I was thinking that multiplied by 4, and so I had that messed up. But yeah, so if you had a minor by taking 4 16-unit classes, then I suppose there is a way they could draw up the term, and I would hope so, that you can get some kind of a minor, but there are not enough classes that I offer, and I offer the only Harvard film classes, and that's kind of the problem of being in my position, because it looks like I'm just doing this for like gain or something, but it's really not the case, because I'm like still feeling like I'm a college student, and I've still got like to figure out which professor helped me the most to thank, and these guys were great, and they work with me all the time, and they helped me through the master class, and they elected me for the master class. So I figure we have all the credentials in place, but the main important thing is with Coursera, it actually gives you the units for the class that you take. And in Coursera, you just watch the video all the way through from beginning to end, and listen to it. It's basically a sound recording that we're actually going for. That's us lecturing on whatever topic we have. And I'm a masterclass professor that teaches film theory, and film production, film history. I haven't taught film production yet in this masterclass setting, and I'm sure I eventually will. Because there's things about like using a camera that you can teach, and they're always going to be ideas that you'll have forever. And when the idea of looking at a camera through the eyepiece that's taking recordings through the lens, and you're adjusting the eyepiece so you can adjust the lens in the f-stop. There's f-stops on a camera to allow less or more light in, and as you increase the f-stop, less light gets in, and it's like you have these boxes that are like these chambers of wonder, but it's because of what you film, and because of what you pointed at, and because of what you directly record on digital data, the scenes you need to put together later for some kind of a film that you had yourself. So now we're thinking, okay, we've studied directors and we talk about film theory all the time, and that's because we do film criticism. And so this class is going to be about, and I'm finally getting to it, and I'll teach today for the full class. But this class is going to be about Orson Welles, and I don't think it's going to be about his biography at all, really. We only have little bits and pieces of that we're even kind of interested in my theories, because the biography isn't so much what we need as more of the film dialogue, or all the films that he made. And the films of Orson Welles, you'll see that as we go through them, that there's about 20 of them, and like 5 of them are missing and nobody's sure what the title are, you know. And it's like this really weird film career that has Chimes of Midnight, Othello, and Macbeth. Those are all like missing films, but that everybody's seen them in like high school. And then like you have like The Stranger, Citizen Kane, Hearts of Age is the first one. And I'd like to concern this beginning to Hearts of Age because, again, the film comment along with Hearts of Age is that this is an avant-garde film. It's coming out in the silent era. You know, it's really out in the sound era, but it's like a silent film. And it has like this box sort of piano in the background that's kind of ringing through the background, and there's this kind of like commentary on like social injustice going on by showing what social injustice is the devil or something. And that's the whole point of Hearts of Age, is that like down with social injustice. And you're thinking this is kind of a propaganda film, but they're doing this magical mystery tour thing in it, so they're like turning into animals or something in it, and it's an Orson Welles student film. And then he's preparing it for John Houseman's company, is what we further realize is that's all setting up in the preview of his career, which all leads to War of the Worlds, where he's talking about the end of the world by narrating this H.G. Wells story. And Orson Welles is reading it even before Citizen Kane with the Mercury Theater and scaring people all over the cities that are hearing this radio program that suddenly the aliens have landed and they're killing everybody. I mean, it'd be like so simple as staging it, but not everyone was familiar with the later familiar Orson Welles voice, and that he was doing movies for cartoons when he finished his career was like, that makes sense because he was doing every kind of movie there was, and in his later career he did like commercials for like 70s TV. You know, it's like Orson Welles was a real figurehead and was a real star director. And by star director, I mean there's some film comment. He was so eccentric that like his personality was read about like even in gossip magazines and stuff. Like, what's Orson Welles going to say to this actress, or what's Orson Welles going to talk to a French director, Jean-Luc Godard, about? And like everybody sees him in like this like chic since Citizen Kane, because he kind of built this really classy style of like expensive filmmaking with big sets and big cargoes. And it's like the whole thing looks like a giant train if you looked at an Orson Welles set. It's like built almost to the latch of where he needs it to be. Like, he would build a city if he could. He'd go back and build Metropolis. He's of that school of like, this is how we make the film. We build it real fucking big, and you get these images that are huge. And you have Orson Welles going against the grain, and he's like telling those that didn't believe that this is it. But you'd be amazed at how many problems they had making the film, and how many compromises, and how many people like were telling them not to do that film that way all the time. When you're Orson Welles, that's just a given. Everybody's going to tell you how to make the film in the film, and I'm not like bagging on anyone in it. It's just like everyone thought they knew how to make Orson Welles films, and he's like, so his Hearts of Age is a good start because he's like, nobody's going to make this but me. It's one of those films that only I'm going to ever see, and if I die and this is the only film I make, well, good for film school. This is what it is. And he's like, he's already at like, he's taking Oxford classes, you know, Orson Welles, even in England. And he's learning like English theater, you know, and that's where the Shakespeare comes in. And again, the biography is interesting because you're like, Orson Welles may have gone here or learned this, but that he was friends with Charlie Chaplin early on was really where the idea of Citizen Kane came from, because William Randolph Hearst knew Charlie Chaplin from that whole incident that where Thomas N.C. was killed by William Randolph Hearst. He shot him. He was trying to shoot Chaplin. Later, they kind of blew it off as something bad that happened, but it was because Marion Davies was with William Randolph Hearst. Orson Welles heard that story from Charlie Chaplin and other people, and then it became this whole big trauma that William Randolph Hearst had been an evil man, and so they already had that rumor going, and then they start Citizen Kane, which is about William Randolph Hearst, and we've deconstructed Citizen Kane in this class, and like in film classes I've taught, and we've taught all the way through Citizen Kane. And this time we're going to look more at like the theory behind style and the theory behind formal style, and how formal style communicates this kind of like entertainment by specializing in what makes individual artists stand out in their, say, color palette, or their chic decoration, or in their complete theatrical combination that's already gotten psychologically theatrical. If there is a psychology of the theater, Orson Welles is it. And it's where that Houseman idea that you're building these magnificent like objects to move things around on them is the idea of the movie. And it's not so much a roller coaster, it's like disconnected, it's like plate tectonics. You kind of let scenes shift to these scenes. And so, for instance, in Touch of Evil, you'll see this sort of thing where they're not only recording the audio of the other person in the film and like having trouble doing it, they're on this like high rise that's all vented out, and so they're running. One's on a higher high rise than the other, and he's trying to record him. And I'm like, that's a weird shot. I wonder why in a million years would they run on here and one run, it's like cat and mouse in a mouse trap or something, And you're like, so, but then he's like got the audio thing, and so you're thinking he's got this big bent piece of scenery that they're running on, and that's how he's filming that scenography of the the setting of the Orson Welles film, and it just looks like it's like this massive bent metal that's part of where a building was, and we see in it what we're supposed to see in it, and what we always see in it every time, even depending on the version, is the guy running above him recording the guy below him, and it's like Joseph Cotton, it's like Orson Welles, and Third Man is really. But that's Third Man, and then there's Touch of Evil that has Orson Welles as a sheriff, and he's like an old man. So what are we talking about when we say that it seems expressionistic, but it's kind of got this Orson Welles technological industrial revolution, like, determination going, that like it seems like he's got this major industrial revolution, seems more fitting. Modern times means more fitting towards the scenario of America than saying that we have it all to ourselves and it's great that we do. And there's commentary on like the American way not always shining through, because these guys are like in these nightmare alleys, or in these nightmare cul-de-sacs. They're always like his characters, the male character that usually he plays, they're usually having some nightmare that's affecting them during the day, and then as they walk through the day, they're still having the nightmare. And it's like, that's how these guys function every day. And it's not mentally, it's like a process of maybe trauma, or maybe more like the modern ethic of loss and forgetting the most important memories of your life, which usually leave you before you know they're gone. And so you have this Orson Welles theatrical character towards these psychological, minds of these like guys that feel trapped. In the trial, the character is trapped. He's surrounded by rooms that are caging him in, again, kind of like this rat cage. And it looks like you're in Caligari in a lot of these films. So there is some expressionist, because he's walking up these plains of mountains in Caligari, and then he'll be going down the other way. And a lot of that's edited out, because we know that some dude can't cardboard cut out a somnambulist walk over the Andes. But if you look into the joke of it is here, but the real thing is that like these are like supernatural, but there's none of that reflected in Orson Welles. And in Orson Welles, it's like the supernatural's not even psychology. Like nothing can help because nothing has meaning, because now we're in more of an existentialist state where we're self-reflexive about our modernity. In other words, we make films that question the national palette that we have in ideology, but it questions it. It doesn't like cancel it out. And you can say that the modernity of the film has that quality of isolation, and has that quality of despair and has that quality of things that are devastating to the heart because all the other memories are gone. And now you're living for the moment, and now in the moment things kind of go off and on, and it's like that Metropolis scene where you have one load of these like guys going into an elevator and guys coming off, and they don't really look sad, but they look like they worked so hard that they're in this like complete shell, and that they're in this complete crux of the matter of the Orson Welles. Like he comments on megalomania in Citizen Kane. He himself doesn't really have it, megalomania, but he pretends to, so he can be eccentric and publicize movies like Citizen Kane. Like, I'll pretend to be like William Randolph Hearst, kind of as a joke, but not really, just to be eccentric. Like some kind of Freemason trick, like where he's pretending to be someone else. I mean, Orson Welles would do impersonations, but it wasn't really that he was into. It was that, like, communicating with the world of film, that they could really do different things with the medium and could really experiment with the medium, and that, like, his different friends being filmmakers like Charlie Chaplin, and he knew D.W. Griffith, and they didn't exactly get along, but they didn't really not, and Orson Welles didn't even think back but to write that Griffith died in jail with communism, and so Orson Welles had this like one conversation with G.W. Griffith later in his career about how Birth of a Nation went wrong, and it was the ultimate one that revealed to the world that it actually did go wrong, because they weren't sure why that movie wasn't working or what was going on, and most of the people that were cultural experts were saying, well, it's so racist that we got to take it off the camera. It's too malfeasant towards like the human race. They're like horrible. So they're getting it out of there, but they didn't really like box it out till Orson Welles and Peter Bogdanovich and all these critics came forward and said, what happened with Birth of a Nation? And they're like, well, now that we're looking back, we don't really support the Klansmen or anything. We don't support the Klansmen, but looking back, we don't. But so now it's like a difference between the movie that doesn't get shown because it's racist, and then they don't make any more movies like it. And so that's why it's an important case, is what they're looking at. These directors that are looking at Birth of a Nation are like, well, it's so racist, we don't like it, but I could see why it was the only film of its kind. And to find something that's only of its kind is actually some kind of a good thing, because it makes it rare. And in a collection, like, I didn't bring any with my collection today, but with my collection, it's like you have these movies, and I have Orson Welles movies, but I'm sure like by now the lawn gnomes have traded in here and stolen out or some of my Orson Welles movies. I don't know. Like, there's Orson Welles movies I let people borrow. I mean, they're such good movies, and I think that it's profound to think that his 15 to 20 movies, 5 of which never got made, like Smiler with a Knife, for instance, he was always working on it, but could get it made after Citizen Kane and before, and after Hearts of Age and all that. And that from Hearts of Age to all the way to F for Fake, which is in the 70s, and Journey into Fear was before that, and then it goes back to Triumphs at Midnight. There's all these movies that he did. He did these movies as an actor, right? Because he was like Cassavetes. He did these movies as an actor, and that's how he had his way of filming. The movies would be him as an actor, yeah, but if they filmed him in a certain way that he was modern and drifting from the current acting type and directing type, then you see how Orson Welles was paying for his movies by being an actor and taking lead roles in these films like Third Man that were called Hollywood classical, and then using that money to turn around and be an independent filmmaker for films like his other film. Like, to keep Hearts of Age alive, he had to make money later in his career as a filmmaker. So he didn't like sell out. He just took acting roles, like John Cassavetes did in Rosemary's Baby to get money. It's like they took acting roles to get money, and then they set up these independent film studios, and they were both involved with Houseman in this sort of racial intermix of like African American actors and white actors being on the same stage and doing Shakespeare together and everything, which is kind of weird because then later with Othello, Orson Welles comes back and does another blackface right after he finds out Birth of a Nation screwed up with blackface. And so there's these oversights that are like even with the blacklist, whereas Griffith was blacklisted for being a communist earlier in that whole period. And so I know we're already covering a lot and it looks like a lot of material. And so we just got to, like, take a few breaths, ease in the spread. Look, we've got 16 weeks to discuss the academic value of what is stylistic, formalistic theory based on a director like Orson Welles, because we're actually looking at the films of Orson Welles rather than like Orson Welles, the filmmaker. And that's the important thing that I can do because I vividly remember these films. Like Mr. Arcadon, I remember the elaborate costumes and the decanted camera angles and the eccentric performances and the sort of near death like quality of everybody, and then like the want to be alone loneliness, and it's like it's kind of comedic, that movie, because it's like Mr. Arcadon crashes his plane at the end. I mean, he doesn't even know how to like fly the thing, and like it's only because he's all nervous and he escape potted it out of there. And so it's like now all of a sudden we're thinking of these films. And we're like, why does he make a film about this sort of infrastructure of infamy that's been going on since like movies like Metropolis and the German era? And it's like you think that it's not really so much that Orson Welles can highlight the accent of it at the top, but it's right at that moment that it breaks down and falls that he always has that exampled in his movies and like illustrated in these images of Orson Welles. And then you got to think that when he did War of the Worlds, he probably wanted some people to believe him, that it was real. And I don't think the ethics of it really makes sense because it's like, well, if he wanted people to think it was real and shoot each other and stuff ahead of time, then they must have had some radio ethic where they were just discussing that happens all the time. But being outre and kind of out there, he could have said it too. The point is that like Orson Welles was trying these experimental, against the grain, kind of surreal, subversive material that was in Hearts of Age and kind of set the stage for whatever else he did in his career. And it's like the devil is due is in Hearts of Age. There's like this like Muppet monster that's like the devil, and it's like they're playing at this piano. And my version of it is on the avant-garde discs that I've seen it. I mean, the version that I own, and it's like it has these like these things in it that make you realize he's like a freedom fighter for the African American actor, and this is something that's really part of his whole career. Whether he has African Americans in his film later, which there's a few, like on the streets of F for Fake, you would see probably African American people in that. But like as far as actors and stars and everything, I mean, again, he was going back to Othello, and he does blackface on it, and it's really not like done in a racist way, but it's really always a racist way with blackface. Like they could never understand what ruins Birth of a Nation, and it was pretty much the blackface, and then like Orson Welles does blackface in Othello. But what's weird about Othello is it has this kind of Orson Welles scenery to it, scenography, where you have these candles again that are kind of like magical realism. They're kind of floating in front of the set, and it's like Belle da Bête, like Beauty and the Beast. It's like the candles are floating on the outside of the stairwell. And so you're like, well, these are good fantasy setups. And we can go all through Othello and find how the candles travel and the camera travels with the candles. But that's the kind of exciting thing you get when you get an Orson Welles style, because Orson Welles, like I said, he'll build like an Atlas Shrugged or Fountainhead all the way to the top, but right as it's about to blow is the highlight of the movie, because right as it blows is right after that, and that's usually the end. Right as it blows. And I mean by the conflict resolution, and the conflict resolution is always irresolute in Orson Welles cinema. The Lady of Shanghai having one of the most, abstract endings of a woman dying, Rita Hayworth shooting her way through a mirror maze and freaking they don't know what happens at the end. I mean, it ends like La Ventura. I mean, it's just like the guy turns the corner. What is this, vertigo? Like all of a sudden it just stops. The line just stops, and you're like, well, we didn't get, and Master Arcade and stuff. They just kind of hit this ending, and then they're over. It's like as soon as they're about to blow is what the whole movie's about. And it could take place in like this small or elongated time. You have the stranger, which is all in this small time where they're taking him down from this kind of like height of being this Nazi sort of war hero, and Orson Welles, and this is a movie he directed, this movie after Magnificent Ambersons. And so, and then we didn't even discuss the trial. So now we've discussed all his movies, and I think each class we should kind of look at as we can between these movies and see these structural themes. And the structural themes we're looking for is, why does he conquer the part about losing it all and having to lose it right at the conflict? That's the conflict, is losing everything, including probably your safety enough for your mortal life or something. And so it's like, well, he doesn't predicate mortals in his film. And I think this is really interesting for classical filmmakers to see as they're transitioning to noir in the 30s and 40s, is because as he's transitioning, he's kind of trying to do a Hitchcock like shot cut, because it's like everything has action at the beginning and everything has action at the end within the frame of most Orson Welles shots, because they're action frame shots. Action frame shots where everything's always moving on a dolly or on a crane or a camera wheelbarrow. They'll do all kinds of things to invent the camera technique that they need for the film camera technology. In today's society, you can get a camera that works for you and works the way you want it to, and you can kind of get better cameras, but they're more easy. They're a lighter burden on filmmaking, because the camera itself can be small or compatible, or it can be this huge apparatus anyway, and it's like even the shoulder pad can wear you down in a news type situation. And so they're making these movies. Orson Welles is making these kind of like pseudo documentary movies that are also infallibly formalized in context. And that's just it. The point where the real meets the modern is the ultimate point of like condemnation of oneself by oneself, because of the lucid transmography of Orson Welles' kind of bereft style of, this is amazing that we're seeing this, but it's so tragic that we've just gotten used to it. But like now, not only are we used to it, it's blowing us away at how much more tragic it's falling. And yet nothing's a tragedy for real theoretically. We've talked about this in film class. Because tragedy, the birth of tragedy kind of has, by Nietzsche, has this idea that like there's this anima and animus, a male and female side to us all, masculine and feminine. And so these Nietzsche elements are like saying that like there are parts of us that deal with female choices and parts of us that deal with male choices in every human being. And this has already been dealt with on the birth of tragedy. And the reason he's saying that is because in the ring cycle is a tragedy. Like by Wagner, and like Nietzsche explores it in the birth of tragedy. It's like Wagner's ring cycle has the male side, which is the bass, and the female side, which is closer to the treble or whatever on our stereo, if we want to look at it that way in sort of a modern context of music and what tragedy is. And tragedy in music is the same thing as it is in Greek mythology. And in Greek mythology, it's like tragedy becomes this idea that the gods have died. The fall of the gods. It's like the gods themselves die in the tragedy. Otherwise, it's not a tragedy. I mean, that's what Latin teaches. If the gods didn't die, the tragedy wouldn't be tragedy. But you have these like tragedies like Oedipus, and it's the most horrible tragedy, except those tragedies that are about the deaths of gods. Because Oedipus wasn't a god. I mean, he was told something would happen, and then it happened, and it was so horrible. It was like he kills his dad, he sleeps with his mom. The Oedipal complex then comes in, where we as men gravitate towards the women so they can like help us regain something lost, and they can do the same thing for us. And it's like symbolic again of like these phallic symbols and Freudianism, where it's like you feel as though, if you're a female, you feel as though someone's pushing you to be sexual in these kind of scenarios with the camera, and it's not necessarily intended or not intended that way. It's always good to have a sexual appeal when doing commercial aesthetics, right? But like when you're doing commercial aesthetics, a sexual appeal isn't a cheap shot, or is. I'm not getting into the misogynistic issues of that. What I'm saying is, if you look at it like, if there's an issue in a film that you have with it, you really don't have that right unless you made the film, because you didn't have to watch it in the first place. Like there's no sign that says you have to watch this. Like you have to watch this movie even though it offended everyone else on earth and won't offend you. I mean, like I would want to watch it personally, being a film buff. Like me, I'm gonna go like, well, I want to see all the Orson Welles films. Keep him coming, even the one where he plays Tesla in the '70s one. These are great, and you can see that on YouTube, and it's totally '70s out, and it's amazing. But like, I don't know if, and I didn't even know Tesla was around in the '70s. This is getting better because he was around in the '40s. Remember, with all those other movies of like, what is it, The Prestige? But we won't discuss The Prestige, though. It has kind of this Orson Wellesian ending, that movie. It kind of has this thing where like there's all these Hugh Jackmans that are coming to life at the end, and he was the character that played in this film. And so it's kind of, and it just ends kind of like on the fact that he's had these clones made of him, and the original one's dead, and it kind of leaves you with the what the heck, the kind of Kubrick ending, the kind of like, it's like a what the heck, it's like it drops off a cliffhanger and it doesn't resolve. So it leaves you like shocked and surprised at the end of even Citizen Kane, even though you see at the beginning of the movie that he's dead and he dies. Kane, Charles Foster Kane, is dead, deceased. And then you don't see him die again till the end of the movie. And what a coincidence. Beginning of the movie he dies, end of the movie he dies, like in Sunset Boulevard. But at the same time, like Orson Welles is like trying this out as though it's never been done. And then there's silent films where it's like Ingberg Holm, where some of these shots are like veered towards having such depth in the background that you can see the shadows in these silent films of Victor Seastrom, of like these hands passing over someone's face, and you can see the shadow as it goes by, And it's like in this candlelit veneer, and so you can see how Orson Welles is using these silent films all throughout his earlier career. And I mean, he's going through these silent films at film clubs with other directors early out in his career, and then finally, like later, he gets to apply these like silent sort of ideas of like coming back to the beginning. I mean, there's this whole idea with Intolerance that like you keep coming back to the same lady that's rocking the baby in the cradle, and you keep coming back to that, and then you cycle back to the story of the film wherever chapter it left off in. And you kind of feel, as Intolerance goes, that getting through it is like not just a test of endurance, it's like a model example of what a beautiful film experience is going to be. Again, for a film buff, as a film teacher, I have to see a lot of movies. I don't really look to see more movies than anyone, because there's a lot of competitive critics that have seen everything, and there's competitive directors that have seen everything. And I got to admit, I've done it well in the critical studies market, but being who I am, I should see many more at a time and kind of batch see them. But I've seen the ones that I preferred, like if I saw a movie like Mouchette or Alcazar Balthazar, I'm going to watch it multiple times, because there's multiple narratives, there's multiple ideals you can pull from Bresson, and then you get this kind of feeling that he's got this seriousness that like Orson Welles kind of has, this seriousness that Bresson has, where it's like this grand illusion feeling, like even with Renoir, where everything's kind of pushing in this stasis of like intensity and anger between the actors, but it's not between the actors, it's between the characters they're playing and how they're written in the script. So it's like with Orson Welles, you're getting self-reflexive and saying he's modern, like Journey to Fear, when he's walking around like labeling like how he's going to make this sort of like pornographic film, but it's going to be like Renaissance style, and he doesn't know exactly how he's going to like push it through with cameras. And then you feel like you're back at like Touch of Evil, at that like destroyed building, and you just take it for granted that they're that he's trying to record this guy on the recording. You know, it's Orson Welles playing these parts in his own movie are parodying the parts that he plays in these other movies where he's like, sort of like in Moby Dick, John Huston, he plays the preacher, and he gives this whole scathing, like, whatever, like, fire and brimstone sermon, and then the whole place is, it's rainy out, and it's like that guy in Moby Dick that tells the story of, like, this sort of, like, say, this guy that gets swallowed by a whale, and you're like, okay, so this is funny because now he's going to take apart in his next film where it's sort of this killer and he's on the run and he's got a kidnapped girl with him. You know, it's like Orson Welles, you never know what movie he'll end up in. It'll either be totally family, like Disney type thing, or it'll be like totally like action packed, like Orson Welles, like in some kind of mod, you know, like 60s gear in movies that haven't been found yet, where he's like smoking a cigar, driving a NASCAR car, you know. It's like, but he's not, that kind of gives you like a right wing impression, and Orson Welles is anything but right wing. I mean, if you look at his films, he's very left wing in his style. Like, we'd already discussed the idea of like communism and blacklists, and a lot of that seems foolish to me because I don't really see how you could have a political party that would really disturb anybody else's, but like, I guess you can. Like, I guess there's really political parties you can be in that would disturb someone else's political party, if you can believe it or not. Because do they really care what the other political party does if they don't have the same view as them? Like, was it arbitrary when they picked all these decisions? And I'm only one because I don't vote. You know, I'm only saying this because, like, I don't really believe that the masses of even America has to just, like, sign up for straight passage of one guy to take care of this all. Now, the president now, I don't comment on because I don't know anything about it. Like, most people seem to be against him that I know, but, like, I don't really mind him because he's rich and all this stuff, right? But, like, the real social textual meaning doesn't come from whether we approve of the powers that be or not. It comes from this ideologically mixed bag of, like, different ideologies, and like they all heterogeneize in this sort of like postmodern corridor of everybody gets to say. And if everybody gets to say, that's usually a pretty good method. Then the strongest thing passes by, and you're like, that was the strongest course of action you could take to push forward the moving image and push forward the image to the next constraint, and the next constraint being where the image is leading into these match on shapes and match on geometry throughout Citizen Kane are astounding. As Hearts of Age is kind of like experimental, but like then you get to the Citizen Kane and you have the Greg Toland with the camera work, and so it's like Orson Welles will take this film and walk with it, but it has this kind of quality, Citizen Kane, of like other Illuminati type business movies like Eyes Wide Shut or Tree Master. It's got this whole idea that like these crumbling skyscrapers are coming down because the man's coming down on him and he wants all the money in the world, and that's how the original occasion of that film came about. There was a version, sort of, we can't tell this for sure, right, but I've read some books, and even it was about the sort of money building empire. Like, that's why his head's all big at the end, you know, and he's a senator, and he's building this, like, sort of, he wants to build a utopia, you know, he's really utopian, and it kind of gets this, like, Dr. Strangelove feel by the time you see his head behind himself on the political stage, that, like, these powers that be are taking menace, but the ideologies that stay in society, even concerning adultery or whatever, are still the same, and people will still find you disreputable if you sleep around on your wife, for instance, in the Citizen Kane action thing with Marion Davies, who may have slept around, but she wasn't, like, necessarily like a problem in any way. Like, people have had this theory that like most of the societal like aristocracy is more aware of this kind of condition of freedom for everybody, but they still have this kind of like overdomed domesticity, and the domesticity kind of gives this like code of language of like not morals but even ethical dilemmas and how to resolve them. And if you get these Orson Welles movies, all these ethical dilemmas are piling up, piling up, piling up, and then there's no resolve. You're left with kind of this shocked feeling of like that was really uncontrollable, like a runaway roller coaster. But then we lived through it, and now we're glad we had the experience. Is kind of what a thriller is, and you see in The Third Man by Carol Reed that this is a total interpretation of a thriller. You know, they're under the sewers, and everybody's having this gun match, and Orson Welles is there again, and this isn't him directing, but it's him acting in a movie that he had to act in to get to direct a film like the next year. As Third Man to the Touch of Evil. And it seems like in these movies were combined. Like that they were made at the same time, and there were scenes from Third Man that were made for Touch of Evil, and there were Touch of Evil scenes made for Third Man. But what's weird is they're not as exactly similar as all that. Like they're not the most similar films, but you can see where there'd be overlap, although the Orson Welles character looks a lot different in the movies, but it's like those movies Pandora's Box and Last Laugh about how they actually do connect together somehow. Like those scripts do actually combine. And it's like you kind of get scared by that because you're like, well, he has the last laugh, and then the girl gets killed by, Jack the Ripper in Pandora's Box, and so you're back to like square one. You have another field of like we put the movies back together, and now the ending is irresolvable even more. And why do we love irresolvable endings? Because it shows us that the power of the image to dedicate to the symbolism of the motivation of the story, which is sometimes ethical and meaning to motivate by, in other words, to progress, which we like because film always moves forward, so we need forward progress to keep up with the film moving at a steady rate with the picture. And we're just looking, and this is like, Orson Welles knows all this from like film clubs and like film schools. Like USC is already a film school at this time, and Orson Welles is already taking, when he made Hearts of Age, I wouldn't be surprised if USC was connected to that. And USC had all these early films that were even like documentaries for like, documentaries for presidents where they'd have this sort of like peeled mask that was like a bust featured like the president, and you sort of look at him, and these things would win awards. These documentaries that USC would make about like different faces of the president. And you're like, well, these seem pretty innocuous, except for then you think, well, I don't know, because then at Disneyland and everything they have the Hall of Presidents, and you're like, well, these are important images now. And like it feels kind of cheesy to defend the leaders back then and to defeat them now. What we love about the movie is that it always critiques the leaders by showing them that they aren't perfect, but that in the modern way they still possess this quality of what classically makes them that character. But then they kind of beguile off into this sort of Don Quixote mess of like, we're going to take care of everything, even if it doesn't look that way. We'll know we did. And then you kind of get this, why are the reasons for no conflict resolve? That everything is conflict, and there's no conflict resolved. And it reminds you of this sort of Battleship Potemkin style with Orson Welles, because he's always like delivering the drumkin of like the train at you. Like with LaRue, he's always saying, look, the technology and the improvisation are going to overwhelm everything in this film because we built the set all jaggedly and confusing. And then when you see it, you don't see how the blocks of it are all on different pushed up locales and everything. You think it's all in one place because the camera pieces are starting to design the film by putting the pieces together, and it's already like classical Hollywood film, and then Citizen Kane being like the lead in to film noir. And that just means you have the camera that's like the chiaroscuro. And the chiaroscuro was to originate the doppelganger in Caligari to be like this sort of, that he was a doppelganger, but he could hide in the shadow too. And so you have this kind of like shadow ruling in Orson Welles. Like there's always shadow room, and then like the shadows are flickering on the ground in Lady from Shanghai, and you have these shadowy pictures. That's a chiaroscuro that'll hide a doppelganger, all right, but you don't really have that in even Mr. Arcadin, where that could have been an uncanny type of ending. I don't know if even F for Fake really has a doppelganger going on with Orson Welles, but it seems like there's more than one person that represents the character he's playing. So we're gonna draw this lecture to a conclusion in just a minute. And I know we just barely looked at the surface of what. So catch your breath. If you're taking the Orson Welles class, this is it. We'll talk more about it next time. And I don't want to end quite yet because there's still a few minutes and a few details. So why I'm not really interested in the biography as much is because I've decided as a student and a teacher that there's no way that you can really have the actor mean something to you different just because their life went different. Like they act on the actors act on the level that they don't bring their personal life to the character, and we've discussed this. So personal life doesn't always get brought to the character. That means never really does, unless it's written in, and even then it'd be a long time over with if that was an emotion that was in the past. So these actors don't play parts necessarily because they reflect their emotions, even if they do. They play them because they're playing the challenging of the acting part. And the challenge of acting is portraying the realism of a character, of like being that character by being that way, like studying what that character would be like and then performing that. And by performing, it's like projecting your energy towards describing the characterization in relation to the plot in the theater. And in the theater, like of John Houseman, it's very Aristotelian, where everything is built with big seamy boards and everything's built with like the kind of lockdown cabinets, you know? And we have these theaters that are addressed to be these like where you can change the costume and you can do ballet and you can do like there's a lot of African American theater that's burgeoning out of like the Harlem Renaissance that comes to John Houseman around the time of Citizen Kane. And I don't necessarily think any of these things hearken to less than the age coming of dawn of modernism, which you can see by Chimes at Midnight, that now modernism is here, everybody's self-reflexive, everybody's in the movie, knows they're in the movie, and is still isolating the characteristics to themselves of their character in relation to the plot of the film. So then you get the plot of the film, and it is the relation of characterizations, and by relation it's how they interact, where they are, and how they interact with their environment, and all these things have to be worked out for a character, no matter like what the character you're playing is. I would think that even in a scenario where there was a kids film like Transformers the movie, where Orson Welles dies while making that, and he's a Unicron and everything, and we're going to talk more about Transformers the movie and everything else that we love about Orson Welles, and like how he was just this kind of like Hitchcock figure. He was like this Hitchcock figure where he dwelt in his kind of purity as a filmmaker and the art form, and could collide uncomfortable things together on film but make it so big that it just all boils over and crashes. And the crash is going to be like, and I'm going to end with this, the crash is going to be like different in each film. It'll be like him falling down stairs, crashing a plane, wrecking a car, you know, dying in a hospital. You know, there's all these, the stranger falls off a clock. I mean, I should with memory be able to tell you how all of them end badly. Touch of Evil, you know, he gets recorded, turned in for being a crooked cop. And then there's this thing where they're always saying Orson Welles is like overweight, but like Orson Welles is one of those actors that he'll put on weight just for a character, and then he'll take it off the next day. Like even in some of his later roles where they were saying that he was getting too big to be on stage, they were just saying that because he was insecure. Like he wasn't really insecure in a way that he didn't know people liked him as an actor, but he was insecure in a way to like he didn't really get compliments a lot, and he wasn't really expecting it. And now he gets all these compliments after the fact about how, you know, Citizen Kane's this great movie. We're studying him in this class. So I hope to learn what it is about his style, because I'm not sure yet. I'm picking it up too, like we all are picking this up at the same time. And we can see that there's some kind of style working in Orson Welles that comes from like this Houseman versus War of the Worlds kind of attitude when it all starts out, and like kind of ends with this like jagged theater weirdness and cruelty, like the end of the world progression of modernism. And modernism is about the end of your life, so it's about the end of the world, because when you die, you don't perceive the world anymore, theoretically speaking. So I'll see you next class, everyone. Thank you.